Military conflict. Russian forces continue to pressure key cities in Ukraine amid further talks over a partial ceasefire. Budget deadline. The federal government runs out of funds by the end of the week. How lawmakers are responding. Vatican diplomat. A former apostolic nuncio to the U.S. has passed away. And Jesuit saint. Learn more about a new film on the patron of Catholic missions. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 7, 2022. Thank you so much for being with us tonight on this feast of Saints Perpetua and Felicity. I'm Tracy Sable. An advisor to Ukraine's president says little progress has been made on allowing citizens to flee cities where fighting is taking place. Earlier, Russian officials said humanitarian corridors would be established so that people could leave safely.
Объявлен режим тишины и открывается 6 гуманитарных коридоров.
The Kremlin's military spokesman saying a partial ceasefire had been established. The humanitarian corridors are expected to be established tomorrow, but talks to end the military conflict across the board appear to have ended without an agreement. Another round of dialogue is scheduled soon, and at least for now, the bombing of Ukrainian cities continues. Pope Francis used his Sunday address at the Vatican to appeal for peace in Ukraine.
La guerra è una pazzia. Fermatevi, per favore.
The Holy Father says 2 cardinals from the Vatican recently visited Ukraine. They were hoping to help the people and to do what they could to end the bloodshed. Pope Francis also called for further negotiations to end the conflict. Despite the conflict, a historic church in Ukraine continues to hold Catholic Mass.
Це правда, ось з такої великої літери. Наша зброя – це молитва, і наша зброя – це те, що ми є на своїй землі.
The military chaplain says the faithful are relying on truth and prayer. The church dates back from the 17th century in Lviv. It has survived World War II and the Soviet era. And joining us now from Lviv, Ukraine, is Associated Press international affiliate reporter Philip Crowther. Philip, so good to see you. Can you give us an update on what you're seeing on the ground where you are in Lviv?
Yeah, well, this sometimes feels like a city that is an awful long way away from a country at war, but it is a city within a war, and you might walk the streets and feel like things are rather normal, but then when you get closer to the train station here, you notice there are a lot of refugees in this city, because this is essentially a stop-off or a transfer point for a lot of those refugees coming from the east of the country, coming from the capital, Kiev, but also from any other place within Ukraine. Anybody who wants to flee to the west, to the European Union, and more than anything to Poland, that being the country within the European Union that has accepted with open arms, it must be said, the largest amount of refugees from Ukraine, well, they will all pass through this town of Lviv. This is where the trains arrive, some buses, cars, vans as well, and then the trip goes on. Some frantic scenes here at the train station, not all that dissimilar to some of the pictures you might have seen at the train stations in the capital city Kiev or in Kharkiv in the north as well. People pretty desperate to get out of this country right now. But the good thing about Lviv is this is a pretty peaceful place. This is where those refugees get a little bit of peace and calm that they so desperately need after a treacherous journey behind them.
And Philip, I understand the mayor there appealed for assistance today amid an influx of Ukrainians seeking safety in the West, saying in part the city has actually reached its capacity to provide for the hundreds of thousands who pass through. What more do you know about that? And also, can you talk a little bit more about this growing humanitarian crisis?
Yeah, it is growing seriously. When you look at the UN Refugee Agency saying that 1.7 million people, more than 1.7 million at this point, have already left Ukraine, that's just a really big percentage of this country's population, and they have left in such a short space of time. 12 days of war now, 12 days of the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and already extreme circumstances for all of these refugees wanting so desperately to leave Ukraine. The humanitarian effort is an enormous one. It's a complicated one, especially inside Ukraine, because it's a lot more difficult to get aid into this country than it is, for example, to those refugees who've already made it over the border to Poland. Over there, where we spent 2 days before traveling into Ukraine, we saw a very well-organized humanitarian effort. Anybody who gets over the border after a very long journey, be it by car, bus, or indeed on foot on those last few miles, they get a warm meal, they get a little bit of warmth, they get a place to spend the night as well, and maybe more importantly, they get means of transport to continue their journey, because for very few, the border town is where they want to be. They want to move on to other cities in Poland where they might have friends or family, or they might want to move to other countries in the European Union. We saw, for example, people offering free rides for refugees to the likes of Italy or Denmark or Germany, for example. A lot of volunteers out there, and some really edifying scenes, to be honest, after those terrible moments that these refugees will have lived through.
We have about a minute left or so, Philip, but I know that you've met so many people along the way in Poland and in Ukraine, that is. Would you mind sharing with us maybe some of the stories that really struck you and you think would be good for our audience to know about?
Well, look, they're not going to be particularly happy ones, but I'll be happy to tell you. The refugees who arrive in Poland are invariably women, children, and the elderly. The simple reason for this is that Ukraine is not allowing people between the ages of 18 and 60 years of age to leave the country. They're expected to stay and possibly fight for their country. Let me give you this example of a German gentleman who actually took me over the border in his car with his Ukrainian wife. The reason why they were going back to Ukraine, or rather why they were going to Ukraine, was to meet their son, first of all, also to meet their son's wife and their daughter. But they were only able to bring the wife and the daughter back into Poland and then on to Germany. They actually went into Ukraine to possibly say goodbye to their son because he had to stay and possibly had to go to war. The father literally telling me before he crossed the border from Poland into Ukraine that he might be seeing his son for the very last time.
So many heart-wrenching stories. And Philip, thank you so much for bringing those reports to us. We appreciate it. Please stay safe.
Thank you.
The White House continues to focus on the war in Ukraine. Today, President Biden held a secure video conference with the leaders of France, Germany, and the United Kingdom to discuss their response to Russia's invasion. And America's top diplomat is visiting countries in Eastern Europe in a show of solidarity. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken meets with allies in Lithuania and Latvia, all disturbed by Russia's constant bombardment of Ukraine. Secretary Blinken accuses Russia of attacking agreed-upon escape routes.
Women and children, the elderly, wounded civilians, people with disabilities are trying to escape cities where there's no heat, no electricity, relentless bombardment, and where they're running out of food and medicine.
At today's White House briefing, Press Secretary Jen Psaki also provided an update on the U.S. response to the war.
You have mothers and children dead on the side of the road. This is heart-wrenching to watch. And it's heart-wrenching to watch, you know? And I think for us who are working in public service, you watch in these moments and there are limitations in the sense that we are not going to send U.S. troops to fight in Ukraine against Russia.
The humanitarian crisis shows no signs of stopping. Refugees from Ukraine continue to pour across the Polish border. Other countries are also seeing an influx. One Ukrainian mother says she escaped with her daughter to Bosnia.
We don't want war in our country. We pray every day.
St. Nicholas Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Troy, New York is just one of the places collecting food and supplies to send overseas to help the victims of war.
The world is saying to Russia, stop these attacks immediately. Let the food and medicine in. Let the people out safely and end this war of choice against Ukraine.
Coming up, government budget. Congress gears up to meet another funding deadline. And family budgets, analyzing the impact of inflation on the U.S. economy. Here in the United States, prices at the gas pump hit a 13-year high this weekend. The average cost of gasoline is now more than $4 a gallon for the first time since 2008. The volatility in the market is being blamed on supply disruptions related to the war in Ukraine and the possibility of an embargo on Russian oil and gas. And joining me now is Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of Real Clear Politics. Tom, great to see you. A lot to get to today, but first let's start off with those rising gas prices, which hit a record high today and are expected to go even higher. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, and what do you think can be done, if anything, to bring some relief to consumers?
Well, that is the question, and the Biden administration is trying to reassure Americans that they're going to use everything at their disposal to try and blunt the impact of gas prices. But you're right. I mean, we saw oil go up to almost $140 a barrel today on the market before it slid back down. So it looks like gas prices are going to continue to rise. And the administration has been reluctant to start producing energy domestically. They've turned to Iran. They've turned to Venezuela to try and make sure that there's enough oil on the market. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But right now, the administration, there's not a lot of confidence that they're doing what's necessary to prevent gas prices from continuing to rise to $5, $6, $7 a gallon. And of course, the political implications of that in a midterm year could be enormous.
Yeah, and I was going to talk about that. You know, it's not just the gas prices that are going up, but we're also seeing home heating costs go up. And now, you know, what folks are paying at the grocery store. What impact do you think this could have on President Biden and his approval rating, which we know is already low?
It is. I was just looking at our Real Clear Politics average. We had a number of polls that came out after his State of the Union address. Very little movement for him. Republicans are locked in against him. Very little movement among independents. This is the problem for the Biden administration. While the Ukraine war is eating up all of the headlines, and certainly is a concern of the American people because they're seeing it on their television screens day in and day out, the number one concern is inflation and the economy. And there we're seeing nothing but continued bad news. And there's not a lot the administration can do about that. And everything that's going on around the globe is sort of conspiring to make all of that worse. And again, the political implications of that, not just gas, but as you mentioned, food prices, you know, the price of used goods, used cars, et cetera, in the country. That's something that Americans feel in their lives every single day, all around them. And they will make the politicians who are in power pay for that at the polls when the time comes.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the midterms, I mean, we're getting closer to the midterm elections. What races are you following right now?
Well, I mean, there are a number of House races that are interesting to watch, but mostly the action is in the Senate. And whether it seems like Republicans are in pretty good position to recapture control of the House of Representatives, despite the fact Democrats have done better in redistricting than people thought. But in the Senate, right now, we're watching all of those close races, particularly out in the West. The two to keep an eye on: Arizona, Mark Kelly, incumbent Democrat, and Cortez Masto in Nevada, also incumbent Democrat. Both of those Democrats are in trouble and could be the key to the Republicans' takeover. Obviously, there are other races like Raphael Warnock in Georgia. There are races in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. But as far as incumbent Democrats go, those are the two most vulnerable. And whether they can stave off what are pretty heavy political headwinds at this point, we will have to wait and see.
Yeah, Tom, I also know that Texas kicked off the midterm election season last week by holding the country's first primaries. Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who's a Catholic, and Beto O'Rourke, a Democrat who ran for president in 2020, are expected to go toe-to-toe in the November gubernatorial election. Talk to us about that, and how do you think that will shake out?
Well, again, for Democrats all across the country, it's the first midterm of the first term of the administration. Always historically bad, always historically a rough go. And so you add on top of that what we just talked about, the political headwinds on not just inflation, but even the other issues that are sort of percolating out there, whether it's crime, the education issues, parental rights. All of those issues seem to be working against Democrats. So when you look at a place like Texas, where Democrats have made gains in the past few cycles and have this dream of turning Texas blue, it's not going to happen this cycle. And while Beto O'Rourke at one point was pretty popular within the Democratic Party and generated a lot of enthusiasm, it's going to be really, really hard for him or for any Democrats really in Texas to mount sort of an uphill battle, because that state is still more red than blue at this point. Too many registered Republicans, too many independents who are leaning Republican this time around.
Yeah, Texas definitely is a hard nut to crack right there. Before I let you go, Tom, wondering what else you were following.
Well, as I mentioned, the other issues that are really on the back burner right now are crime. You heard Joe Biden mention crime and not wanting to defund the police very strongly in his State of the Union. That puts him at odds, not just with members of the left wing of his party, but a lot of these Democrats that are running as progressives around the country. So that's one issue. Continue to watch crime, not just in the big cities, but in suburbs around the country, which is where Republicans have had trouble in the past couple of cycles. And then the education issue, it continues to be an issue that Republicans are trying to capitalize on the way that they did in Virginia, in the Virginia gubernatorial race. We'll see whether they're able to make that a national issue that helps them across the country in November.
All right, Tom, I have to leave it right there. Thanks so much for coming on. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Well, on Capitol Hill, government funding runs out this Friday. Republicans may block a deal because the White House wants more COVID funding. GOP lawmakers tell EWTN News Nightly the new aid is not needed.
It's too much federal spending. And when the Democrats last year passed their quote-unquote COVID bill, which only 10% went to COVID, and now they're saying they don't have enough money, that there's almost $2 trillion right there.
Oh, the White House wants more than $22 billion for future COVID needs. Republican Senator Mike Braun tells EWTN News Nightly that he wants to know where the previous COVID relief money went.
A lot of money left. We don't need anything further for COVID other than honesty on what actually happened when we spent all that money.
The House faces a short week to get their work done. Democrats have a 3-day policy retreat in Philadelphia starting Thursday. The U.S. Supreme Court has reinstated the death penalty for the Boston Marathon bomber. On Friday, the nation's highest court said convicted bomber Dzhokhar Tsarnaev had received a fair trial in 2015. A lower court overturned the death sentence in 2020. The Argentine Bishops Conference is expressing remorse, empathy with victims and a commitment to make amends following last week's sentencing of Bishop Gustavo Zanchetta for the sexual abuse of seminarians. Bishop Zanchetta received a prison term of 4.5 years last Friday. The case has brought scrutiny because he had received promotions and support from Pope Francis. Longtime Vatican diplomat Cardinal Cacciavillan passed away on Saturday at the age of 95. In addition to posts at the Vatican, Cardinal Cacciavillan served as Apostolic Nuncio to the U.S. from 1990 to 1998. During 73 years of priesthood, he also served in the Philippines, Kenya, India, and Portugal. His funeral was earlier today in St. Peter's Basilica. Up next, For the Greater Glory of God, a film honors the life and legacy of a founding Jesuit saint. A former leader for the Diocese of Grand Rapids, Michigan, has died. Bishop Robert Rose led the diocese from 1989 until his retirement in 2003. He prioritized Catholic education and justice for all. Bishop Rose served the people of Michigan for 65 years. He was 92 years old. The city of Alexandria, Virginia, was planning to establish March 10th as Abortion Provider Appreciation Day, but then a Catholic leader spoke out. Bishop Michael Burbidge of Arlington, Virginia, asked the faithful to express their opposition. They did, and it worked. Today, the city's Democrat mayor said that he was removing the request from consideration. And for more on this story, including reaction from the Catholic community to the mayor's announcement, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. And finally tonight, the Jesuit Order is celebrating a major anniversary this week. It is the 400th anniversary of the canonization of its founder, St. Ignatius of Loyola. And there is another reason for the Jesuits to celebrate. The Jesuits, also known as the Society of Jesus, are commemorating the 400th anniversary of the canonization of St. Francis Xavier. EWTN has released a new movie about one of Ignatius Loyola's earliest companions. St. Francis Xavier to the Ends of the Earth was shown to Jesuits in Rome over the weekend. The order has grown to more than 16,000 priests, brothers, and novices around the world. Joining us now from Rome is Andreas Tannhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Andreas, great to see you as always. Can you tell us more about this?
Sure, and thank you, Tracy, for having me. This Saturday, we expect Pope Francis to head the celebrations of the 400-year anniversary of the canonization of St. Ignatius and of St. Francis Xavier. If his health allows, I should add. As you know, Tracy, he just had to cancel a trip to Florence last week because of severe pain in his knee. But we know that St. Ignatius is dear to the Pope, coming from the Society of Jesus himself. The celebrations will be held at the Jesuits' principal church here in Rome, Chiesa del Gesù, that's the Church of Jesus, where Ignatius is buried and St. Francis Xavier's hand is being displayed. Because, by the way, his body, so the one of St. Francis Xavier, is buried in Goa, India. Only his hand was brought to Rome. And with this hand, he baptized at least 30,000 people throughout Asia. That is why he became the patron saint of missionary work.
And Andreas, what will your team do to cover this anniversary? What are you planning?
Well, you know that Jesus' command to bring his message of love to the ends of the earth is at the core of EWTN's calling. So we will not only cover the 400-year anniversary, but we already partnered with Christiana Video and the Jesuits to produce a fantastic docudrama on St. Francis's life. We presented it 2 days ago together with the global Jesuit leadership at Chiesa del Gesù. Many people from the Society of Jesus and from the Vatican Curia were present, including, for example, Paolo Ruffini, prefect of the Dicastery for Communication. He's in charge of all the communication activities of the Holy See. This just shows how important the person of St. Francis Xavier and his message is for the Vatican and for Pope Francis as well.
And Andreas, before I let you go, what would you say is St. Francis Xavier's message for our church today?
Well, first of all, I'd like to invite everyone to see for themselves, and you can watch this docudrama on EWTN free on demand online. And to answer your question, Tracy, I believe there are 3 things we can learn from this great saint. First of all, be open, be radical, and be faithful. Being open means asking the Lord what he wants you to do with your life and not to set him any limits. Leaving his ancestral roots and going first to Paris and then to Rome to team up with St. Ignatius and start a society for priests was considered completely crazy by his peers. But when St. Francis Xavier then gave again everything up to travel to India and Far East Asia, facing persecution and almost certain death, people were just shaking their heads. That hinted at how radical he was with following Jesus and bringing his message to the ends of the earth. It's a good question for us for Lent as well. Are we as radical and committed when we're being laughed at for being Catholics, for believing in one truth? Or do we easily give in and follow mainstream morality? And then also faithfulness. St. Francis Xavier did the unthinkable. He baptized tens of thousands, and many millions of Catholics can trace their faith heritage back to him. But he failed on his one true goal to bring Jesus to China. He died of a sickness while waiting to be allowed into the country. And yet, he became one of the greatest missionary saints of the Church. And will we remain as faithful to God and to the teachings of the Church as he did, despite hardships and despite failure? Well, I think, Tracy, those are the big questions for today, for our Church today. And St. Francis Xavier might certainly be an inspiration to all of us.
Well, Andreas, thank you so much, as always, for your reporting. We appreciate Andreas Tannhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.